So judges, please introduce yourselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Ed Philpott. I'm a trial lawyer. My office is in Laconia, New Hampshire, right in the middle near Lake Winnipesaukee. There's a mouthful for you. Michael.
My name is Dr. Michael Anderson, and I'm a retired professor and a retired college administrator. I live in northern Minnesota near a very big lake, and I work with Native American kids in the Anishinaabe Ojibwe Nation.
My name is Molly Russell. I'm an attorney with Legal Aid of West Virginia, and I specialize in domestic violence law, and this is my first year judging national competition.
So I'd like to have you all introduce yourselves.
Thank you for allowing us to testify before you today. We're a unit composed of all juniors from East Grand Rapids High School. My name is Ellie Sheridan.
I'm Reese Brown.
And I'm Megan Balama. We are coached by the fabulous Adam Horos and Ben Langholz, and we are Unit 4.
Thank you. Unit 4. How the values and principles embodied in the Constitution shaped American institutions and practices. Members of Congress are not only legislators, but they, quote, are also inquisitorial and should meet frequently to inspect the conduct of public officers, close quote. How effectively do you believe Congress has used its investigatory power? Explain the difference, if any, between Congress's power to investigate and the power of oversight. Which power, in your opinion, is more significant? How effectively do you believe Congress has used its oversight powers?
As Chief Justice Warren once stated, the power of the Congress to conduct investigations is inherent in the legislative process. This broad investigatory power is innate to the foundation of a representative government. As provided in the Necessary and Proper Clause, the congressional investigatory and oversight powers are essential to create an accountability in government. McGrain v. Daugherty confirms this. Over time, the conduct of inquisitorial powers has changed in an attempt to create effective legislation and more effectively carry out the oversight necessary to maintain public trust. Although use of the investigatory power has served in uncovering tyranny within the executive, Congress has not used this check to be as effective as possible.
Following Congress's investigation into the Watergate scandal of the Nixon administration, Senator John Pastori introduced a resolution to establish the Church Committee to investigate federal intelligence operations, notable for uncovering the most infamous scandals of U.S. history. Subsequently, investigatory powers of Congress have been used more effectively in accordance with this resolution. Further, the Ethics in Government Act of 1978 created the Office of Special Counsel, used to investigate individuals who hold high positions in the federal government while limiting political bias. The procedural changes of post-Watergate Congress has led to more successful and effective investigations, such as uncovering the Iran-Contra affair and uncovering the flaws in our security that led to 9/11.
Although the inquisitorial powers have significant advantages to the well-being of our government, it is still plagued and restricted by pervasive issues. Investigatory powers are operated conducive to the aspirations of the majority party within Congress. For example, the attacks in Benghazi led to a partisan investigation after it was revealed that the State Department originally covered up the reasoning behind the assault. To reduce the effects of partisanships, independent commissions may be established to reduce the effect of party affiliation looming over the investigation. Recently, with the events at the Capitol on January 6th, an independent commission is being implemented.
The difference between the power to investigate and oversight is that investigation expands outside of the executive branch, while oversight is largely limited to executive agencies. For example, Congress, using this power over interstate commerce from Article 1, Section 8, investigated Major League Baseball in 2006 over drug use. In 1912, Congress's investigatory power allowed for an investigation into the sinking of the Titanic, leading to legislation ensuring maritime safety. On the other hand, oversight committees practice comprehensive policy oversight on legislation under their jurisdiction, which includes monitoring the executive branch to ensure correct policy implementation. For example, the Oversight Committee has full power to monitor federal bureaucracies such as the EPA.
While the power of oversight includes the investigatory power, both are still of critical importance standing on their own. The power of oversight provides for continued monitoring of executive agencies, which proactively prevents wrongdoing and corruption. Oversight effectively operates as a safeguard against corruption by having records be prone to scrutiny. Presently, more than 75% of the use of inquisitorial powers is exercised through letters written to the executive agencies, resulting from oversight instead of investigations.
Congress's oversight powers are powerful and expansive. However, they are not being used as effectively as possible. Members of Congress have very limited staffing budgets, causing great strain in areas that require specific attention, such as oversight. Therefore, oversight is largely disregarded. Antiquated rules such as time limits on questionings make hearings both frustrating and unproductive. Moreover, specific partisan aims for investigation plagues useful fact-finding with further divide in Congress. Despite its issues, additional funding, updated regulation, and education of congressional staffers could provide for better oversight in our government and in turn, a more functional government. Thank you. We are now ready for your questions.
To what extent does partisanship influence the congressional oversight function and congressional investigations? I think that's a two-part question.
Well, partisanship in Congress has a great effect on congressional oversight and investigations, as the power itself has been pretty neglected in recent years. And that is partly due to congressmen being really reliant on re-election and really focused on it. So they're more invested in being re-elected than they are in investigating executive agencies that may cost them their re-election.
I agree with my colleague Reese that partisanship has definitely has had a great impact on investigations and oversight. We saw this with the investigation into former President Trump's and the Russian collusion, where Congress was doing this investigation, but it was mainly controlled by the Democratic Party, as they were asking all the questions and conducting the investigation, while the Republicans were more hesitant to say that the president was guilty and not wanting to convict or say that he did anything wrong.
In addition to both of my colleagues, I agree with both of them, but another example of this is during the 2016 election, when candidate Hillary Clinton was being convicted of sending emails to foreign identities, and this affected her election process because it created such polarization within the election and affected who people were going to vote for.
Molly, Michael? You're both muted.
I was muted, sorry. Okay, so in Madison's 51st Federalist paper, he talks about how important it is for the three branches of government really to watch each other and to check each other. But he also talks about the importance of having the legislature, for example, in this case, watching itself. Can you think of examples of legislative committees where the Congress has put a check on itself to make sure that they're doing things right?
I think that with oversight committees, such as the subcommittee of the Homeland Security, that this ensures that this committee is doing everything correctly, such as border control, security matters, and protecting our country.
So you're in your earlier testimony, your team said that oversight is largely disregarded. And that's why I asked the question. You can think of no examples of when oversight was effective either against the legislature or against another branch of government?
I think that funding definitely affects it from being so effective. I think that with more funding, they could hire more staff members that are more qualified and that know how to use their investigative resources, or even specialized staffers that can make sure that the law is being implemented correctly.
And in addition to my colleague, I think that education of congressional staffers would provide for better advice to our Congresspeople. 60% of the congressional staffers are under the age of 35. Therefore, they're very inexperienced and uneducated. And I think that if they had more education, it would provide for better resources for our congressional staffers.
Thank you.
Can you give a positive example of oversight?
Well, this is on the state level. The Flint water crisis is an example of a positive investigation because it was actually started by the media. People were realizing that there was lead in the water and they put it out on social media. So Michigan's Congress implemented an investigation and they found that there was in fact lead in the water, and this led to increased funding of the pipes and made sure that the pipes were regularly checked up on.
Can you give us a federal example?
Yes, when in 2008, Congress investigated the financial crisis, which was when multiple banks were making very risky loans and losing a lot of money and were stopped being paid. This was very threatening to the financial system of our whole United States. And because of this investigation, they created legislation called the Dodd-Frank law, which made sure that banks were keeping a percentage of their money in reserves.
Another federal example that was exposed by the media, in fact, would be the Miley massacre, which was exposed by a journalist who leaked the Pentagon Papers named Seymour Hersh. It led to a congressional investigation, and it affected how the public viewed the Vietnam War. And since it was already disagreed upon a lot in the public, and it was a very controversial affair, the investigation into the atrocities that were committed in the Miley massacre led to a lot of public disagreement.
So if we're largely disregarding oversight, which your team says, and we're stuck with partisanship, why bother? Why bother having investigations?
Well, I believe investigations are still extremely powerful and can be used very effectively. Just because Congress is very partisan now doesn't mean it will be in the future. And if we solve the partisanship in Congress through like solutions such as ranked voting, then proper investigations can be non-political proper investigations can be put in place that will lower the power of the executive and the secrecy that it has behind executive privilege.
I also believe that the power to investigate is still necessary. As, for example, when it investigated 9/11, this was the power to investigate was very much needed, as this was a very public and unfortunate matter that affected the people. And without the power to investigate, we wouldn't have been able to solve what happened and stop it from happening in the future.
What sorts of investigations do you think it's proper or important for Congress to conduct?
Well, in my opinion, intelligence agencies, as the NSA and the FBI, have been, in the past, they have overstepped their boundaries, like with the creation of the Church Committee that exposed the abuses of power. And nowadays, with the development of technology, it has become even easier for these agencies to gather information on citizens. And I believe that is one agency that really needs to be investigated, and more checks need to be put place, and updated legislation as well.
In addition to my colleague, I believe that the Committee on Environment and Public Works needs a lot of oversight, because with the uprise of wildfires, endangered species, and pollution, there needs to be oversight within our country to make sure that those issues are being correctly taken care of.
I also agree, in addition to my colleagues, that the ATF, which is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, this needs a lot of oversight, as many people have been questioning this oversight of the gun dealers and the guns that have been involved in a lot of crimes.
Okay, go ahead, Molly.
How would you mark, or how do you determine if an investigation has been effective?
Well, I'd say one way to determine whether it's been effective is whether the outcomes of the investigation have been positive, or like effective, like legislation has been passed due to the investigation. And one example of this would be the investigation into the Challenger crash, which led to updated safety regulation with NASA. And may I finish my statement?
Sure, finish your statement.
And the Challenger crash itself was non-political, and I'd say it's been effective because that the updated safety has been in place till today. And
Good.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was a nice conversation, fun conversation. So a little bit of feedback, a few things that I noticed. I liked some of the examples that you brought in. Congressional investigation of baseball. I thought that was great, and it did happen. And it was an investigation, of course, because baseball is not a federal government agency, right? I like how you explained the difference between investigation and oversight, except that in some of your answers to questions, I kind of got lost as to whether or not you were talking about oversight or investigation. So I think you want to be careful. The words are important when you're relaying to us in response to a question an example. And the one that comes to mind is the Independent Commission on Benghazi. That might be a bad example for me to use, because the question is, did you have congressional oversight of a federal department, the Department of State, or did you have an investigation into personal actions of a politician? So there are areas where they do get blended a little bit, and you just want to be clear with your language around which you're referring to. Molly?
Okay, so first of all, I thought you guys had some examples, and to echo my colleagues, you guys had some examples of stuff that haven't been brought to our attention today, which I enjoyed. It was refreshing hearing the Challenger crash. Nothing about the Challenger crash is refreshing, but I enjoyed hearing something different. So I appreciated that, talking about wildlife fires, endangered species. One bit of advice I have for you, if you guys move forward, is to make sure you answer the question directly. So when I asked about, give me an example of an investigation, you went state to federal. My suggestion is go federal and then say, and more specifically as it affects me in my state, go federal to state, go do federal first. But I think bringing in a state investigation, which is one nationally and is applicable to your life, I think that's important. And overall, I think you guys did a great job. Thank you.
Oh, gotta make sure I'm not muted. Okay. Yes. Also, I thought you had many examples. I've been checking them off. You talked about the ATF, the environmental, bank loans, even mentioned Dodd-Frank that away, baseball, Titanic, church reports, and then the My Lai massacre. I had forgotten that went through a legislative commission. That was a good example to remember. I'm of the Vietnam era anyway, so I would have probably paid attention. Also Benghazi, you brought that up. So a good example, use Challenger example as well. I would advise you, when you bring up two things. One, you brought up the idea of putting together independent commissions. That's a kind of a new idea. I'd go down that road a little bit and maybe give us a little more on what that might look like and why that would solve the problem. Because sometimes I think in Washington, they say, well, let's get another commission, but it was a pretty good idea that you brought that to play in this particular report. So I might go down that road a little further. And you also heard me talk a lot about the thing one of your teammates said about the oversight had largely been disregarded. When you bring those up, somebody like me and some old fat guy is gonna go down the road a long ways with you. So just be sure that if you have something in your testimony that is a possible trigger to somebody who has an interest in that, we're going to go down that road a while. So look back at your presentation before, if you get to Monday, and say, where's my triggers, and am I ready for the response and questions? I thought you did a good job, though. It's not an easy topic to stumble with. Good job.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.